The morning sun cast long shadows across the training ground of the Galactic Academy. Students from 12 different worlds stood in neat rows, their diverse forms creating a strange but beautiful sight. Some were tall and thin like glass sculptures. Others looked like moving water in clear containers. A few resembled walking crystals that caught the light and threw rainbows across the dusty ground. Among them stood 4 humans from Earth, looking almost plain compared to their alien classmates. Jiho Kim pushed his dark hair from his eyes and studied the landscape around them. The Academy sat on the planet Karis 7, a world known for its extreme environments and perfect conditions for survival training. Professor Vextal stepped forward. His reptilian skin gleamed green and gold in the sunlight. He had been teaching survival courses for 40 years and had seen students from every known species. His yellow eyes held the wisdom of someone who had watched many young beings learn to stay alive in hostile places. "Welcome to Advanced Survival Training," Professor Vextal said. His voice carried easily across the group. "You are here because your homeworlds have sent their best. You will learn skills that may one day save your life or the lives of others." Nara. Choi, one of the human students, stood at attention. Her military training showed in her straight posture and alert eyes. Next to her, Kang Minho adjusted his data pad and recording equipment. As an anthropologist in training, he wanted to document everything about this experience. Yuna Park checked her medical supplies one more time, her gentle nature evident in how carefully she handled each item. But it was Jiho who seemed most interested in their surroundings. While other students focused on the professor, Jiho's gaze kept drifting to the landscape beyond the academy walls. "Behind me," Professor Vextal continued, "you can see 3 distinct training environments." He pointed to a lush green forest to the north. "The Emerald Woods will teach you about finding food and water in rich environments. It looks easy, but even forests have dangers." To the east lay a mountain range with snow-capped peaks. "The Crystal Heights will test your ability to survive in cold conditions. The temperature drops to -50 degrees standard. The air is thin. Many students struggle there." Then the professor turned toward the west. His expression grew serious, almost grim. The cheerful tone left his voice. "And there," he said, pointing to an endless stretch of red sand, "lies the scorched wastes." Every student turned to look at the desert. It stretched as far as the eye could see, a sea of crimson sand under the blazing sun. Heat waves rose from its surface, making the air shimmer like water. Even from this distance, they could feel the warmth radiating from that direction. "The scorched wastes are forbidden," Professor Vextal said firmly. "No student is allowed to enter that region under any circumstances. The heat reaches 180 degrees standard during the day. At night, it drops to freezing. The sandstorms can strip flesh from bone in minutes. There is no water for 500 kilometers. In any direction." A crystalline student named Thex clicked nervously, the sound like wind chimes in a storm. "Professor, surely even our heat-adapted classmates could survive there for a short time." Professor Vextal shook his head. "Even our Pyronian students avoid that place. Pyronians evolved on a world of active volcanoes. Their bodies can handle temperatures that would kill most species instantly, yet they call the scorched wastes the land of final sleep. If beings made of living fire fear a place, you should too." The professor's words sent a chill through the group, despite the warm morning air. Several students stepped unconsciously away from the western direction, as if the desert might reach out and grab them. "Every year," Professor Vextal continued, "we lose someone who thinks they know better. 3 years ago, a brilliant Aquarian student decided to test his moisture reclamation suit in the desert edge. We found his equipment 50 meters in, melted beyond recognition. We never found him." Yuna Park raised her hand politely. "Professor, what makes the desert so much more dangerous than other hot environments?" Surely with proper preparation and equipment. Equipment fails, the professor replied sharply. The sand is like tiny razors. It gets into everything. Breathing filters clog within hours. Cooling systems overload and burn out. Solar panels become useless when covered in sand. The desert defeats technology as easily as it defeats flesh. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Most students now looked at the desert with proper fear and respect. They nodded when Professor Vexatal explained that their survival exercises would take place only in the forest and mountain regions. But Jiho still stared at the red wasteland with curious eyes. He seemed to be studying the way the sand moved. In the wind, how the heat created patterns in the air, the angle of the sun above the dunes. "Mr. Kim," Professor Vextal said, noticing Jiho's continued interest, "do you have questions about the safety protocols?" Jiho turned back to the group, but his mind was clearly still thinking about the desert. "The temperature variation you mentioned, Professor, from 180 degrees to freezing in one-day cycle. What causes such extreme shifts?" Several alien students made sounds of surprise. Why would anyone want to understand the deadly desert better? "Thin atmosphere and low moisture content," the professor replied slowly. "Sand heats quickly but also loses heat quickly. Without water vapor to hold warmth, the temperature drops fast after sunset." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about the environmental mechanics," Jiho said with a slight smile. "On Earth, humans lived in deserts for thousands of years. I wondered how this one compared." Professor Vextal's expression became stern. "Mr. Kim, I hope you are not thinking of making comparisons through personal experience. Earth's deserts, while challenging, are nothing compared to the scorched wastes. This is not a place for human curiosity or exploration." "Of course not, Professor," Jiho replied, but his eyes drifted back to the red horizon one more time. The briefing continued with practical information about their upcoming forest training exercise. They would spend 2 weeks learning to find shelter, locate water sources, identify safe foods, and signal for rescue if needed. Each species would face different challenges based on their biology and homeworld conditions. As the morning session ended, the students broke into small groups to discuss the training ahead. The humans naturally gathered together, their shared background making communication easy. "That desert looks incredible," Jiho said quietly, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear. Nara frowned at her classmate. "It looks deadly." The professor wasn't exaggerating for effect. Every survival instructor I've known speaks the same way about truly dangerous places. Minho was already taking notes about the different species' reactions to the briefing. From an anthropological perspective, it's fascinating how fear responses vary between species. But I agree with Nara. That place sounds like certain death. Yuna nodded thoughtfully. The medical challenges alone would be overwhelming. Dehydration, heat stroke, respiratory problems from the sand, severe burns from sun exposure. There would be no way to treat those conditions in the field. But Jiho continued to glance toward the west, where the red sands beckoned under the climbing sun. Something about that hostile landscape called to something deep in his human heritage. His ancestors had crossed the Sahara, survived in the Australian outback, and thrived in the American Southwest. They had looked at impossible places and found ways to make them home. That evening, as his classmates studied their forest survival manuals, Jiho researched everything he could find about the scorched wastes. The more he learned about its dangers, the more fascinated he became with the challenge it represented. He did not yet know that his curiosity would soon lead him into the heart of that forbidden land, or that what he discovered there would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about survival and the limits of adaptation. 3 days into the forest survival exercise, the differences between species became clear to everyone. The emerald woods stretched for miles around their base camp, filled with towering trees whose leaves filtered the sunlight into soft green patterns on the forest floor. The crystalline students struggled with the most basic tasks. Their transparent bodies were designed for their home world's caves and underground cities. In the forest, they had trouble seeing clearly through all the organic matter. Thex had spent an entire morning trying to build a shelter before giving up in frustration. "These plant materials keep breaking when I try to arrange them," Thex complained, his voice creating musical tones like a broken wind chime. "On my world, we simply grow crystal formations for protection." The Aquarian students faced different problems. Wexa kept her water-filled environment suit running constantly, but the forest's uneven ground made movement difficult. Her flowing form was perfect for underwater cities, but poorly suited for climbing over fallen logs and rocky terrain. "My mobility systems are not designed for solid surfaces with so many obstacles," Wexa bubbled through her suit's speakers. "I keep getting stuck between these wooden structures." Even the Pyronian students, who seemed most comfortable in various environments, showed signs of stress. Blazek's flame-like body flickered uncertainly as he tried to start a campfire without burning down the entire forest. "Controlled fire is much harder than free burning," Blazek admitted, his voice crackling like a fireplace. "At home, we simply release our inner flames. Here, I must contain the energy without extinguishing it completely." But the human students worked together like they had been training in forests their entire lives. They moved through the woods quietly, reading signs in broken branches and disturbed soil that other species missed entirely. Nara took charge of their shelter construction. Her military experience showed as she selected the best location, considering wind patterns, drainage, and concealment. She directed the others with calm efficiency. "Jiho, find us long, straight branches about arm thickness," she instructed. "Minho, we need smaller pieces for cross-bracing. Yuna, look for materials we can use for weatherproofing." Within 2 hours, the humans had built a shelter that impressed even Professor Vextall during his rounds. The structure would keep them dry, warm, and hidden from both weather and potential predators. "Excellent work," the professor told them, making notes on his datapad. "Your species shows remarkable adaptability to unfamiliar environments." Minho had already identified several edible plants and clean water sources. His anthropological training helped him recognize patterns that indicated human-compatible resources. He shared this information freely with other students, earning grateful responses from several struggling alien classmates. Yuna set up a medical station using supplies she had gathered from the forest. She found plants with antiseptic properties, and others that could reduce pain and inflammation. Her gentle nature made injured students seek her help even when their own species had different medical officers, but it was Jiho who showed the most natural forest skills. He could move through dense underbrush without making a sound. He found hidden paths that cut travel time in half. He seemed to understand the forest in ways that amazed everyone, including his fellow humans. On the third evening, as other students gathered around their various campfires, Jiho sat slightly apart from his human teammates. He appeared to be studying his forest survival manual, but his eyes kept drifting westward toward where the scorched wastes lay beyond the trees. "You are thinking about that desert again?" Nara said, settling down beside him. She had noticed his distraction over the past few days. "The professor said no one has ever survived there for more than a few hours," Jiho replied quietly. "But humans survived in the Sahara for thousands of years. We lived in Death Valley and the Australian outback, places that other Earth species avoided completely." Minho looked up from his notes about alien social structures. "Those places had water sources, Jiho. Hidden springs, underground rivers, morning dew. The scorched wastes have nothing. The professor was very clear about that." "Maybe," Jiho said, but his tone suggested he was not convinced. "Or maybe no one has looked hard enough. Desert people on Earth knew secrets that outsiders never learned. They found water where others saw only sand. Yuna joined their conversation, her medical training making her practical about survival issues. Even if there was water, the temperature extremes would kill you. 180 degrees during the day, freezing at night. No human body can handle that range without serious medical support. Desert nomads on Earth handled temperature, swings of over 100 degrees, Jiho pointed out. They learned to work with the environment instead of fighting it. The conversation continued until late in the evening, with Jiho's human teammates trying to convince him that the scorched wastes were different from any earthly desert. They could see his fascination growing stronger each day, and it worried them. That night, the forest settled into its usual patterns. Nocturnal creatures began their hunting calls, while diurnal animals found safe places to rest. The alien students struggled with the unfamiliar sounds and movements, but the humans found the forest night comforting and familiar. Nara woke sometime after midnight. Her military training made her a light sleeper, sensitive to changes in her environment. Something felt wrong, though she could not immediately identify what had disturbed her. She looked around their shelter and felt her heart sink. Jiho's sleeping area was empty. His blanket lay neatly folded and his survival pack was missing. Moving carefully to avoid waking Minho and Yuna, Nara slipped outside. She activated her small flashlight and examined the ground around their shelter. Jiho's footprints were easy to follow in the soft forest soil. They led away from camp in a straight line. Westward. Nara's stomach clenched with fear as she followed the trail through the trees. The prints were clear and purposeful, showing that Jiho had not wandered off by accident or gotten lost. He had planned this departure carefully. The trail led her to the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to rocky ground and sparse vegetation. Beyond this transition zone, the land sloped down toward the desert. Even in the cool night air, she could feel heat radiating from that direction. Jiho's footprints continued across the rocky ground, heading directly toward the scorched wastes. Nara ran back to camp as fast as the dark forest would allow. She shook Minho and Yuna awake, her voice urgent, but quiet enough not to alert the other campsites. "Jiho is gone," she whispered. "His trail leads toward the desert." Minho sat up quickly, instantly alert. "Are you certain? Maybe he just went to find water or investigate something nearby?" "I followed his tracks to the desert boundary," Nara replied. "He is heading straight into the scorched wastes." Yuna was already gathering her medical supplies. "We need to alert Professor Vextal immediately. If Jiho entered the desert hours ago, every minute matters for a rescue attempt." They hurried through the forest to Professor Vextal's command tent. The professor was still awake, reviewing the day's training reports by lamplight. His reptilian features showed immediate concern when he saw their expressions. "Professor," Nara said formally, "we need to report a missing student. Jiho Kim appears to have entered the scorched wastes during the night." Professor Vextal dropped his data pad. In 40 years of teaching, he had seen students make foolish decisions, but none had ever deliberately walked into certain death. "Are you absolutely sure?" he demanded, standing quickly. "I followed his trail to the desert edge," Nara confirmed. "The footprints are clear and purposeful. He planned this." The professor activated his emergency communication system. Within minutes, search teams were being assembled and rescue equipment prepared. But even as the academy mobilized its resources, everyone knew the grim reality. The scorched wastes had never returned anyone alive. In the growing chaos of the emergency response, none of them noticed the small figure moving steadily across the red sands under the star-filled sky. Jiho walked with careful steps, already adapting his pace and breathing to the desert environment. He carried water, basic supplies, and something more important than either: the accumulated knowledge of thousands of years of human desert survival, encoded in his genes and cultural memory. Behind him, His worried classmates and teachers prepared for what they believed would be a recovery mission rather than a rescue. Ahead lay the vast unknown of the scorched wastes, and whatever secrets it might hold. Dawn broke over the academy with an emergency unlike any the institution had seen in decades. Professor Vextal stood in the command center, surrounded by monitoring equipment and rescue coordinators from 6 different species. Red lights flashed on every screen, indicating the active search operation in the scorched wastes. The search teams had launched before sunrise, equipped with the most advanced survival gear the Academy possessed. Cooling suits rated for extreme temperatures, atmospheric processors, emergency shelters, and long-range scanning devices, all loaded onto hover platforms designed for desert terrain. Captain Threx led the primary rescue team. His reptilian physiology gave him the best chance of surviving the desert heat, even with mechanical assistance. His team included 3 other heat-adapted species and enough equipment to establish a temporary base at the desert edge. First team. Reporting! Captain Threx's voice crackled through the communication system. We have reached the 50-kilometer mark. Temperature readings show 160 degrees standard and climbing. Cooling systems functioning at maximum capacity. Professor Vextal watched the team's progress on his main display. 50 kilometers was farther than any rescue team had ever penetrated into the scorched wastes. But it was still only a small fraction of the desert's total expanse. Any signs of the missing student? The professor asked into his microphone. Negative, came the reply. Sand has covered any tracks from the night hours. Visual scanning shows no movement, no shelter constructions, no signals of any kind. The landscape appears completely lifeless. In the Academy's medical bay, Una paced nervously while monitoring the rescue team's vital signs through their suit telemetry. The stress readings from even the heat-adapted rescuers showed dangerous levels. Their hearts worked overtime to pump blood through bodies struggling against the desert's assault. Their core temperatures are rising despite the cooling systems, Una reported to anyone who would listen. If they push much deeper, we will have 4 more casualties instead of rescuing 1. Minho worked frantically at a data terminal, analyzing weather patterns and geological surveys of the desert region. His anthropological training had taught him to look for patterns that others might miss, but the data painted a grim picture. The overnight temperature dropped to -15 degrees. Standard, he announced to the command center. Even if Jiho found shelter from the day heat, he would have faced deadly cold with no protection. No human could survive both extremes in sequence. Nara stood silently at the main viewing window, staring out at the red horizon where her teammate had vanished. Her military training told her to accept the tactical reality, but every human instinct refused to give up hope. The search continued through the morning hours, but the results remained unchanged. Team after team pushed deeper into the wasteland, only to find empty sand and killing heat. Their equipment began failing at the 75-kilometer mark, with cooling systems overloading and communication arrays clogged with the razor-sharp sand particles. Team 3 reporting equipment failure, came another voice through the static. Our atmospheric processor just shut down. Breathing filters are completely blocked. We need to withdraw immediately. Professor Vextal made the hardest decision of his teaching career. All teams, begin withdrawal to safe zones. Repeat, all teams withdraw. We cannot lose more lives in this operation. The alien students gathered in the main assembly hall as the rescue teams returned. Their diverse forms created a somber rainbow of worry and confusion. Many had never encountered the concept of a student simply disappearing into certain death. Thex, the crystalline student, chimed sadly as he spoke. In our culture, we sing memory songs for those who join the eternal crystal formations. Should we sing for the human Jiho? Wexa bubbled thoughtfully in her aquatic suit. Among my people, we release glowing bioorganisms into the deep currents. To honor the lost, the lights carry their memory to distant waters. Blazek's flame-like form flickered with subdued colors. Pyronians believe the departed become part of the great fire that burns at our world's core. We could light a memorial flame for your classmate. But the three remaining humans stood apart from these well-meaning offers. Nara's expression remained hard and determined. Minho continued working at his data terminal, cross-referencing every piece of information about the desert. Yuna organized medical supplies as if preparing for a patient who might still return. "We appreciate your kindness," Nara said formally, to their alien classmates. "But humans do not hold memorial services for missing people. Jiho is not dead until we have proof of death." The alien students exchanged confused glances. Their species had different relationships with death and loss, but they all understood the concept of accepting inevitable reality. The humans' refusal to acknowledge the obvious seemed like psychological denial. Professor Vextal called the humans aside for a private conversation. His reptilian features showed genuine concern, not just for their missing classmate, but for their mental state. "I understand your loyalty to your teammate," he said gently, "but you must accept what has happened. No being can survive in the scorched wastes without massive technological support. Even our search teams barely managed 75 kilometers with the best equipment available. Humans have survived in impossible places before," Nara replied, stubbornly. "Our species' history is full of people who lived through conditions that should have killed them." "This is different," Professor Vextal insisted. "This is not just difficult. This is absolute. The temperature extremes alone would stop a human heart within hours. Add dehydration, solar radiation, and respiratory damage from the sand particles, and survival becomes physically impossible." Minho looked up from his research. "Professor, I have been studying the historical records. Has anyone ever conducted a comprehensive survey of the deep desert regions beyond the first 100 kilometers? "Why would anyone waste resources on such a survey?" the professor replied. "The near regions are completely barren. Logic suggests the deeper areas are even more hostile. Logic suggested many things about Earth's deserts, too," Minho said quietly. "Until humans proved logic wrong by finding ways to live there." That afternoon, Professor Vextal made an official announcement to the assembled students and faculty. The search operation had been called off due to equipment failures and safety concerns for the rescue teams. Academy records would list Jiho Kim as missing and presumed deceased. "We will hold memorial services tomorrow evening," the professor announced. "All students and faculty are invited to participate in honoring our lost colleague." The alien students began planning their various cultural tribute ceremonies. They spoke in hushed tones about the tragedy and how it reminded them of the dangers their training was designed to help them avoid. But the three remaining humans did not participate in these discussions. They met privately in their quarters. That evening, their conversation focused entirely on facts and possibilities rather than grief and acceptance. The search teams only covered a tiny fraction of the total desert area, Nara pointed out, spreading maps across their table. They followed standard grid patterns designed for quick recovery operations, not comprehensive searches. The equipment failures started at 75 kilometers, Minho added. But those were alien technologies designed for alien physiologies. Human desert survival techniques do not depend on complex equipment. Yuna studied medical data on her portable screen. The temperature and dehydration challenges are severe, but not beyond human adaptation limits if someone knows the proper techniques. Bedouin nomads regularly survive temperature swings almost as extreme. They worked late into the night, researching everything they could find about both earthly desert survival and the specific conditions of the scorched wastes. The more they learned, the more convinced they became that their teammate might still be alive. Outside their window, the red desert stretched endlessly under the star-filled sky. Somewhere in that vast expanse, they believed, Jiho was proving once again that humans could survive where other species could not. The memorial service would proceed as planned, but 3 humans would be noticeably absent from the ceremony. They had more important work to do, preparing for a reunion they refused to believe would never come. In the distance, the wind carried sand across the wasteland, covering and uncovering secrets that the desert had kept hidden for millennia. Soon, those secrets would begin to reveal themselves to a curious human who refused to accept that survival was impossible. Deep in the scorched wastes, 300 kilometers from the academy, Jiho Kim moved across the red sand with the steady rhythm of someone who understood the desert's heartbeat. His skin had darkened to a deep bronze color, and his body had adapted in ways that would have amazed his worried classmates. The 4th day of his journey began before dawn, as it had every day since he entered the wasteland. Jiho woke in the shallow cave he had dug beneath a large rock formation. The cave stayed cool during the blazing day and trapped warm air during the freezing night. He had learned this technique from studying Bedouin survival methods on Earth. His water situation was critical, but not desperate. The survival pack he carried contained enough water for 3 days of normal activity. But Jiho was not engaging in normal activity. He moved only during the cool hours of dawn and dusk, resting in shade during the day heat and staying warm in his shelters during the cold nights. More importantly, he had found water sources that the Academy's scanners had missed completely. On his 2nd day, following techniques used by Aboriginal Australians, Jiho had located underground moisture by watching the flight patterns of insects and small desert creatures. Where life existed, water existed somewhere. He dug down through sand and rock until he found a thin trickle of groundwater, enough to refill 1 water bottle per day. On his 3rd day, he discovered that certain desert plants stored moisture in their thick stems and roots. The water tasted bitter and required careful filtering through cloth from his pack, but it was clean enough to drink. His anthropological training had taught him to recognize plant adaptation patterns that indicated stored resources. But it was on the 4th day that Jiho found something that changed everything. The morning sun revealed strange geometric shapes, jutting from a sand dune ahead of him. At first, he thought they might be natural rock formations worn into unusual patterns by wind and sand. But as he climbed closer, his trained eyes recognized something that made his heart race with excitement. These were not natural formations. They were ruins. The structures were unlike anything in the Academy's architectural databases. Smooth curves, blended with sharp angles in ways that seemed to follow mathematical principles he could not identify. The material looked like metal but felt warm to the touch, even in the cool morning air. Most amazingly, the surfaces showed no signs of sand, damage despite being exposed to the harsh desert environment. Jiho explored the visible portions of the ruins carefully. The buildings were mostly buried under centuries of sand accumulation, but what he could see suggested a complex of interconnected structures covering several square kilometers. As he examined the strange architecture, something remarkable happened. Panels in the walls began to glow with soft blue light. The glow followed his movement, activating as he approached and dimming as he moved away. The ruins were responding to his presence. Jiho found an entrance partially cleared of sand and squeezed through into the interior spaces. Inside, the temperature was noticeably cooler than the outside air. The glowing panels provided gentle illumination that revealed corridors stretching deeper into the buried complex. The walls showed markings that might have been writing or mathematical formulas. Jiho photographed everything with his data recorder, knowing that these discoveries would revolutionize understanding of Kara 7's history. But the most amazing discovery came when he found what appeared to be a central chamber. The room was circular, with a domed ceiling covered in star patterns that seemed to move and shift as he watched. In the center stood a pillar of the same warm metal as the walls. When Jiho approached, the pillar began to project holographic displays showing the desert environment around the ruins. The displays were clearly some kind of environmental monitoring system. temperature readings, wind patterns, moisture detection, solar radiation levels, all presented in visual formats that were surprisingly easy to understand, despite being created by an unknown species. As Jiho studied the displays, he began to understand something profound about the civilization that had built this place. They had not tried to fight the desert or hide from it behind walls and cooling systems. Instead, they had learned to work with the desert's natural patterns. The ruins were designed to channel air currents for cooling during the day and heat retention at night. Hidden panels opened and closed automatically to regulate temperature. Water collection systems gathered moisture from the air during the brief periods when humidity levels rose above zero. Most remarkably, the entire complex seemed to be powered by the desert environment itself. Solar collectors, wind generators, and thermal exchange systems all worked together to provide the energy needed to run the environmental controls. Jiho spent the rest of the day exploring and learning. The ancient systems seemed eager to teach him, displaying information whenever he showed interest in a particular mechanism. By evening, he had begun to understand the principles behind desert adaptation technology that was thousands of years ahead of anything the galaxy currently possessed. That night, sleeping in a chamber designed for rest and recovery, Jiho experienced the first truly comfortable night he had enjoyed since entering the desert. The room maintained perfect temperature and humidity while providing clean, filtered air to breathe. He woke refreshed and energized, ready to continue his exploration of the ruins and the desert beyond. Over the following days, Jiho learned to use many of the ancient systems. Clothing fabricators created garments from desert materials that provided perfect insulation and moisture management. Food processors converted bitter desert plants into nutritious meals that actually tasted good. Water reclamation systems extracted moisture from air and biological waste with incredible efficiency. But more than just using the technology, Jiho began to understand the philosophy behind it. The ancient builders had not seen the desert as an enemy to be conquered. They had recognized it as a complex system to be understood and worked with. The desert was not trying to kill visitors. It was simply following its own natural patterns. Life and death, heat and cold, abundance and scarcity, all flowed in cycles that could be predicted and prepared for by those who took the time to learn. Using techniques he learned from the ruins, combined with human desert survival knowledge passed down through generations, Jiho found himself not just surviving in the scorched wastes, but actually thriving. His skin continued to adapt to the extreme sun exposure, developing natural protection that no alien species possessed. His body learned to conserve water more efficiently and regulate temperature more effectively. His senses sharpened to detect the subtle signs that indicated weather changes, water sources, and safe shelter locations. On his 10th day in the desert, Jiho climbed to the highest point of the ruins at sunset and looked back toward the academy. From this distance, the forest and mountains where his classmates trained looked small and insignificant compared to the vast red expanse that had become his home. He thought about his worried teammates and teachers. By now, they would have declared him dead and held memorial services. They would be grieving for someone who was experiencing the adventure of a lifetime. Jiho smiled as he watched the stars appear in the clear desert sky. Tomorrow, he would explore deeper into the ruins and learn more about the remarkable civilization that had mastered life in impossible places. He had water, food, shelter, and knowledge. He had everything he needed to continue his journey into the heart of the scorched wastes, where even greater discoveries waited to be found. The desert wind whispered across the ancient stones, carrying secrets that only one human was finally ready to hear and understand. 2 weeks had passed since Jiho Kim disappeared into the scorched wastes. At the Galactic Academy, life had returned to its normal routine. The memorial service had been held with appropriate solemnity. The remaining human students continued, their training with quiet determination. Professor Vextal had filed his final reports and closed the case. The communication center was nearly empty during the evening shift. Operator Zilex, a young crystalline being, monitored the standard frequency channels with half attention while studying for upcoming exams. The night shift was usually quiet, with only routine weather reports and supply deliveries to track. That was why the incoming signal nearly caused Zilex to fall from his station chair. The transmission came from deep within the scorched wastes, from coordinates that should have contained nothing but empty sand and killing heat. The signal was clear and strong, transmitted on Academy emergency frequencies with proper identification codes. Academy Communications Center, this is Cadet Kim Jiho, requesting permission to extend my independent research project in the scorched wastes. Please respond when convenient. Zilex stared at his equipment displays, convinced that his crystalline neural matrix had developed a fault. The voice sounded cheerful and energetic, as if the speaker was enjoying a pleasant camping trip, rather than calling from the middle of an impossible wasteland. Impossible, Zilex whispered, his voice creating nervous harmonics in the air around him. He ran diagnostic checks on all his equipment. Everything functioned perfectly. The signal was real, originating from exactly where the displays indicated, transmitted by someone who claimed to be a dead student. Zilex activated the emergency alert system with shaking appendages. Within minutes, Professor Vextal burst into the communications center, followed by the Academy's senior staff and the 3 remaining human students. "Play the transmission again," Professor Vextal ordered, his reptilian features showing disbelief and growing excitement. The recording played through the speakers, filling the room with Jiho's unmistakable voice. Nara gasped and grabbed Minho's arm. Yuna covered her mouth with both hands, tears of relief starting in her eyes. "That is definitely Jiho," Nara confirmed. "Voice pattern, speech rhythms, everything matches perfectly." Professor Vextal took the communication microphone with unsteady hands. In 40 years of teaching, he had never experienced anything like this moment. "Cadet Kim, this is Professor Vextal. Please confirm your status and location. Are you injured? Do you require immediate rescue assistance?" The response came back almost immediately, as if Jiho had been waiting beside his transmitter. "Professor Vextal, good to hear your voice. I am in excellent health and do not require rescue. I am currently located at coordinates 247.8 by 156.3, approximately 400 kilometers into the wasteland. I have made some remarkable discoveries that I believe will interest the Academy greatly." The communications center fell silent except for the soft hum of equipment. 400 kilometers into the scorched wastes was deeper than any expedition had ever traveled. It was farther than most people believed the desert extended. "Jiho," the professor said carefully, "how have you survived in that environment for 2 weeks? Our rescue teams could barely manage 75 kilometers with full technological support." "I found something incredible, Professor. An entire, buried civilization that mastered desert survival technologies thousands of years ago. I have been learning from their systems and combining their knowledge with human desert survival techniques. The results are quite remarkable." Minho pushed forward to the microphone. "Jiho, this is Minho. What kind of civilization? What technologies are you talking about?" "Minho, you will love this from an anthropological perspective." Jiho's voice crackled through the speakers. "These people, whoever they were, developed a complete philosophy of environmental cooperation rather than environmental domination. Their buildings work with the desert instead of fighting it. They have systems that extract water from air, generate power from temperature differences, and create comfortable living spaces using nothing but natural materials and clever engineering." Professor Vextal exchanged glances with his senior staff. If Jiho was describing real technologies rather than heat-induced hallucinations, the implications were staggering. "Cadet Kim, can you provide proof of these claims, physical evidence, or detailed documentation?" "I have recorded over 200 hours of video documentation, Professor. I have samples of their materials, copies of their technical specifications, and working demonstrations of several key systems. But more importantly, I understand the principles behind their technologies. I can teach others to use these methods. Yuna took the microphone next. Jiho, are you really healthy? No dehydration, heat exhaustion, injuries from the environment? Yuna, I am healthier than I was when I left the academy. The desert environment is challenging, but once you understand how to work with it instead of against it, it becomes quite manageable. I have clean water, adequate food, comfortable shelter, and moderate exercise. My physical condition has actually improved significantly. The impossibility of this conversation was not lost on anyone in the room. A human student was casually discussing comfortable living conditions in an environment that had defeated the most advanced rescue equipment the academy possessed. Jiho, Professor Vextal said, we need to retrieve you and examine these discoveries. Immediately. Can you travel to the desert edge to meet a recovery team? Professor, with respect, I would prefer that you send a small team to my location instead. The journey here is quite educational, and there is much more to explore in the deeper regions. Also, I believe a demonstration of the technologies in their original setting would be more convincing than any description I could provide. Professor Vextal felt his worldview shifting in ways that made him uncomfortable. Everything he knew about survival science and environmental limits was being challenged by a human student who sounded like he was enjoying the experience. The journey to your location would be impossible for any rescue team, the professor pointed out. No equipment can function at those distances into the wasteland. That is true for traditional technologies, Professor, but I can guide a team using the techniques I have learned. With proper preparation and the right approach, the journey is difficult but completely manageable. I have mapped safe routes, water sources, and shelter locations for the entire distance. The communication continued for another hour, with Jiho describing discoveries that seemed to come from science fiction rather than reality. Advanced materials that regulated temperature automatically, environmental systems that required no external power sources, agricultural techniques that could grow food plants in pure sand, using only atmospheric moisture. By the end of the conversation, Professor Vextal had authorized the most unusual expedition in Academy history. A small team would attempt to reach Jiho's location. Guided by his instructions and equipped with both traditional gear and experimental equipment based on his preliminary descriptions. As the communication center slowly emptied, the 3 human students remained behind to plan their participation in the rescue mission. He did it, Nara said quietly. He actually survived where everyone said survival was impossible. More than survived, Minho corrected. He is thriving, and he has made discoveries that could change how every species approaches hostile environment. Colonization. Yuna smiled through her relieved tears. I never doubted him. Humans do not die easily, especially not Jiho. He has always been curious about impossible things. Outside the communications center, the red desert stretched endlessly under the star-filled sky. Somewhere in that vast expanse, a human student was proving once again that impossible was just another word for something that had not been properly understood yet. The rescue mission would launch at dawn, beginning a journey that would revolutionize the galaxy's understanding of environmental adaptation and human capability. In the depths of the scorched wastes, ancient technologies hummed quietly as they prepared to share their secrets with visitors who were finally ready to learn. The rescue expedition that set out from the academy 3 days later was unlike any mission in the institution's history. Instead of heavily armored vehicles loaded with cooling systems and emergency shelters, the team traveled light and moved. During the cooler hours, just as Jiho had instructed, Professor Vextal led the group personally, his reptilian physiology making him the best choice for desert conditions. Captain Threx accompanied them with minimal equipment. Most surprisingly, all 3 remaining human students had been permitted to join the mission against standard safety protocols. Your teammate's survival suggests that human desert adaptation capabilities may be significantly underestimated, Professor Vextall had explained when approving their participation. Your presence may be crucial for understanding and documenting these discoveries. The journey followed routes that Jiho had mapped through his radio communications. Hidden water sources, natural shelter formations, and optimal travel times that avoided the worst temperature extremes. What should have been a death march became a challenging but manageable expedition. On the third day, they reached the coordinates Jiho had provided. The rescue team stared in amazement at the geometric structures rising from the red sand. The ruins were exactly as Jiho had described, but seeing them in person was still overwhelming. "Impossible," Captain Threx muttered, his thermal sensors confirming that the structures maintained comfortable temperatures despite the blazing desert sun. These readings show internal cooling without any detectable power source. Professor Vexitall was photographing everything when a figure emerged from one of the partially buried entrances. For a moment, he did not recognize the person approaching them. Jiho Kim looked like he had been born in the desert. His skin had bronzed to a deep tan that seemed to glow with health and vitality. His body showed lean muscle development perfect for desert travel. Most remarkably, he moved across the hot sand in simple clothing without any visible discomfort, while the rescue team struggled even with their protective gear. "Professor Vexitall, welcome to the discovery of the millennium," Jiho said with a grin that could have powered the Academy's lighting systems. The professor found himself speechless. This was not a rescued survivor. This was someone who had found their perfect environment and thrived in it beyond all expectations. Nara was the first to recover from the shock. She ran forward and embraced her teammate, noting that his skin felt warm but not overheated despite the crushing desert conditions. "Jiho, you look incredible," she said, stepping back to examine him more carefully. "How is this possible?" "The human body is more adaptable than anyone realized," Jiho replied. "Combined with techniques learned from this ancient civilization, survival becomes not just possible but comfortable." Minho immediately began documenting everything with his recording equipment. "These ruins, Jiho, how old are they? What species built them?" "I estimate they are at least 10,000 years old, possibly much older," Jiho said, leading them toward the main entrance. "As for the builders, I have found no clear indicators of their species type, but their understanding of environmental adaptation was far beyond anything the current galaxy has achieved." Professor Vextall followed in stunned silence as Jiho guided them through the buried complex. The technology he demonstrated seemed to violate several laws of physics: rooms that stayed cool without power, water systems that extracted moisture from desert air, materials that regulated their own temperature automatically. "The key insight," Jiho explained as they toured the facilities, "is cooperation rather than domination. Most species approach hostile environments by trying to create artificial bubbles of their home conditions. These builders learn to work with the environment's natural patterns instead." Yuna examined the medical applications with growing excitement. The air filtration systems, the temperature regulation, the water purification methods, these could revolutionize medical treatment in extreme environments. The most impressive demonstration came when Jiho activated the Central Environmental Monitoring System. The holographic displays showed real-time conditions across thousands of square kilometers of desert, with detailed analysis of weather patterns, resource locations, and optimal travel routes. "This is why rescue missions failed," Jiho pointed out, indicating the display data. Everyone was looking for traditional survival indicators: water sources visible from the surface, natural shelter formations, temperature-stable regions. But this environment operates on completely different principles. Captain Threx studied the displays with growing amazement. "You are saying that the entire desert is habitable if approached correctly?" "Not just habitable," Jiho confirmed. "Comfortable. The scorched wastes contain enough resources to support a significant population if people understand how to access and utilize those resources properly. The return journey to the academy took 4 days, but it felt like a victory parade rather than a rescue mission. Jiho led them along routes that made desert travel seem almost easy. He showed them techniques for finding water, creating shelter, and maintaining comfortable body temperature using nothing but environmental awareness and simple tools. By the time they reached the academy, every member of the rescue team had become a convert to Jiho's desert survival philosophy. The news of their return spread through the academy like wildfire. Students and faculty gathered in the main courtyard to witness the impossible. A human who had not only survived the scorched wastes, but returned looking healthier and happier than when he left. The alien students stared in amazement at Jiho's transformed appearance. His sun-kissed skin and confident bearing made him look like he belonged in the desert rather than in their climate-controlled classrooms. "How?" Thex asked, his crystalline voice chiming with confusion. "Our species has studied hostile environment survival for centuries. How did one human student succeed where our most advanced technologies failed?" "Different approach, different results," Jiho replied simply. "Humans evolved on a planet that regularly tried to kill us. We learned to adapt and work with hostile environments rather than hiding from them." Professor Vextal spent the next week in constant meetings with academy administrators, government officials, and scientific research teams. Jiho's discoveries promised to revolutionize desert colonization efforts across the galaxy. Planets previously considered uninhabitable might suddenly become valuable real estate. The formal debriefing session was held in the Academy's largest lecture hall, with representatives from dozens of species in attendance. Jiho presented his findings with the calm confidence of someone who had achieved the impossible and knew it. The scorched wastes contain approximately 50 ancient sites with preserved technology, he reported. Each site offers different insights into environmental adaptation techniques. I have spent 3 weeks exploring, and I estimate there are resources and knowledge sufficient for several years of intensive research. A Peronian representative raised a flame-covered appendage. "You are saying that our fire-adapted physiology, which should provide natural advantages in high-temperature environments, is less effective than human adaptation techniques?" "Not less effective," Jiho clarified. "Just different. Your species evolved for direct heat resistance. Humans evolved for environmental adaptation flexibility. Both approaches have their advantages, but for complex environments like the scorched wastes, flexibility provides better long-term survival prospects." The questions continued for hours, with Jiho calmly answering challenges to concepts that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. His documentation and physical evidence left no room for doubt about his claims. As the formal sessions concluded, Jiho submitted his request for extended research authorization. He wanted to return to the desert with a full scientific team to conduct comprehensive studies of the ancient technologies and their applications. "Professor," he said during their final private meeting, "this is just the beginning. The scorched wastes contain secrets that could benefit every species in the galaxy. But more importantly, they prove that humans have capabilities that we ourselves have never fully understood." Professor Vexatal looked at the young human who had revolutionized his understanding of survival science. "Jiho, in 40 years of teaching, I have never been more wrong about anything. I told you that place was certain death." "You were not wrong, Professor," Jiho replied with his characteristic grin. "For most species, it would be certain death. But humans are not most species. We are the ones who look at impossible places and ask not whether we can survive there, but how we can thrive there." 3 months later, the first permanent research station was established in the scorched wastes. Jiho served as Director of Desert Adaptation Studies, leading mixed species teams in exploring and documenting the ancient technologies. The desert, that had once been considered the most hostile place on Karis 7, became the galaxy's premier center. for environmental adaptation research. Students from across known space came to learn techniques that challenged everything they thought they knew about survival in extreme environments. And at the center of it all, a sun-kissed human continued to grin as he proved, day after day, that impossible was just another word for something nobody had figured out yet. The class had been warned to stay away from the desert. The human had returned carrying the keys to surviving anywhere in the galaxy.